Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your angels and guides who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes. And you can learn more at my website, illuminatingsouls.com. But for now, the angels and I are here to help you come into a place of rest, relaxation, and hopefully a place that helps you drift off to sleep. I have been using sleep podcasts for many years now, and I love them. I use one every single night. And this is what inspired me to create this podcast for you. And what's so wonderful about a creation like this is you are free to use it in any way that supports you. You have my blessing. Because I have heard from many of you that you're using this during the day, if you just need a little bit of a respite from life. You know, perhaps you're using it when you go on your walk in the morning, that you are welcome to use this podcast when you're falling asleep or when you are intentionally wide awake and listening to what we bring forward here. So in whatever way you find your way to this podcast, my hope is it supports you and you can feel the love and the joy that we are infusing into each episode. Truly, it is a blessing to support you. And if you are enjoying the podcast, I have a simple request. If you would please consider leaving a review or a rating on iTunes or in whatever way you listen to the podcast. It really helps other people find their way to the podcast as well. So I invite you to join me in taking a nice deep breath in. Perhaps you just heard the beginning of my breath. It started before I even knew it was coming. Just a beautiful deep breath in and out. And I thought that for this episode, I would invite the angels in to help bring healing to our bodies. As I'm recording this, it is Monday, and I had a lovely weekend that involved hiking with a friend. We went up to Tilden Park up in the Berkeley Hills, and it was just gorgeous. Redwood groves and beautiful trails, and I had the best time and wonderful, wonderful heartfelt conversation with my friend. And the next day my body said, "Hey, what happened?" Because it's been a long time since I've been hiking. And as I was getting ready to go to sleep last night, I thought, oh, I'd love some meditation with the angels, with some healing energy for my body. And so I thought, well, let's record it. Let's record it. Let's infuse it into our stream so that it will be there for you and for me and for our bodies whenever we need it. So I'm going to invite you to get comfortable in whatever way works for you. And just breathe some love into your beautiful body. it's very interesting as someone who identifies as a spiritual being that I have almost my whole life had a very tenuous connection with my body. That my body never quite felt like it fit. And I see people who are athletes and seem to spend a lot of time in their bodies and enjoy their bodies. And that hadn't really been me. I required quite a bit of deep healing work to come into a place where I could love my body. Right? This beautiful body, it is required for this incarnation. And when I was going through the University of Santa Monica, in the second year, we did a big project, and it had to be something very heartfelt. And the thing that I really wanted to heal was coming into love with my body. And at the time, that meant losing weight, because everything about my body was about my weight at that point. And I started a body journal where I wrote to and from my body. And I had been judging my body so harshly for so much of my life that I thought my body was perhaps feeling sad and rejected. And I will share with you a funny interaction I had with my body during this time. And some of you have heard this story before, but I bring it forward in the spirit of the wisdom and magnificence of our bodies, even if we are not aware of that status. So I had written just a heart-rendering journal entry of apology to my body. You know, it was, I'm so sorry. I have judged you, and I have been unkind, and just kind of it went on like that for quite a few paragraphs. And then I took a deep breath and shifted consciousness. And I waited for my body's reply. You know, there's a form of therapy called Gestalt therapy, where you take on sort of the I am, the embodiment of the aspect that you're working with. So I tuned into the wisdom of my body, or maybe I didn't know it was the wisdom of my body at that point. I tuned into the aspect of consciousness that I related to as my body. So my body said, although it swore, and I'm not going to swear here, but it said, that's some old stuff, sister. We stopped listening to you a long time ago. We're pretty impressed with us. We're good here. We pump your blood. We beat your heart. We breathe oxygen into your lungs. We give great hugs. We laugh. We're pretty impressed with ourselves. We got it going on here. We're just waiting for you to get the memo. And the line of energy was so powerful. I just had to laugh. I started to laugh. And I was amazed, because I had never contemplated my body as this powerhouse. It had always been a sad part of my story. And that started a lot of healing for me with my body, was contemplating things from the perspective of the innate wisdom of the body. And I know that we go through many different experiences with our bodies. And it's a lifelong journey to learn how to be present with our physical forms, especially for those of us who don't have a strong identity with our bodies. That might sound very foreign to those of you who are very much in alignment with your physical presence. But just a peek behind the curtain, there are many of us who have had a hard time associating with our physical form, with our physical incarnation, I would call it. So, my friends, here's to our bodies. Whether you're feeling in alignment with it, or if you're having challenges with it, if you're hearing this podcast, it means you're still here. And so your body is serving as a vessel for your soul in this incarnation. And what a beautiful, beautiful vessel it is, because it is allowing you to be present right now and experience this love through the filter of your heart and consciousness. And this is only possible because you are here with your body. So I'm going to call the angels in, and we are going to bring love and healing and light to your gorgeous body temple. So I invite you to take a deep breath in, just allowing your body to soak in the love. And if you're feeling challenged by your body, and if you're having a hard time loving it right now, then outsource that to the angels. Let the angels bring love to your body right now. So I'm going to call in the angels. So beautiful, beautiful angels on high. I invite you to join us here. And I ask that you infuse this broadcast with waves of love in service to each of our deepest healing, bringing in light that will help our bodies, our minds, and our spirits to come into our wholeness, into lightness of spirit, into wellness and well-being. And just take a deep breath in. And the angels are bringing to you a beautiful column of golden light that is descending around your body. And as this light comes to you, it brings the deepest level of healing to every cell in your body, to your muscles and your ligaments, your joints, just allowing your body to be soothed as the light comes to all your vital organs, to every part of your body. And if there is a body experience that you are having that is challenging for you, just direct the light to those parts of your body, balancing your energy levels, your adrenals, your cortisol levels, helping to bring healing to your immune system, opening to the love that is here for your body temple, your beautiful, beautiful body temple. Just sending love, messages of love and gratitude to your body right now. And again, if you're feeling challenged by that invitation, just ask the angels to do it on your behalf. And say, angels, bring love and healing to my body. And just breathe in the light as these beautiful waves of energy are traveling from your crown chakra all the way down your spine, down to your feet. This energy and healing light are coming in a way that is also helping your body system to relax and grow deeper into a state of rest. And give yourself permission to connect with the wisdom of your body. The wisdom that is always present. Your body is a blessing. It is a miracle. It allows your eyes to crinkle when you laugh. It allows your unique laugh to emanate into the world when you are touched by joy. It allows you to smile comfortingly to someone you love. It enables you to eat something delicious. It enables you to witness the beauty of this day. It allows you the joy of snuggling, whether you're snuggling with your pets or a loved one or your favorite blanket. I'm big on snuggling, especially in a sleep podcast. This body of yours is beautiful and powerful and wise and is worthy of good rest. So take a deep breath in and know that as you sleep tonight, the angels will bring healing to your body in service to your highest and best good. So just letting your body know that it has permission to receive healing, that it is well loved, it is cared for, it is sacred, as are you. And just take another deep breath in, giving yourself permission to drift off, that this is your time to let go of the waking world and move into that beautiful mystery of sleep, where you will be tended to body, mind, and spirit, with the hope being that when you awaken, you will feel refreshed and inspired and connected even more with the beauty of your spirit. So one more deep breath in and out. And while you rest, I'm going to tell you a story. And for tonight's story, I'm going to read to you from a really interesting series. It's Children's Stories in English Literature by Henrietta C. Wright, and it was published in 1892. This author has written several volumes: Children's Stories in American Literature, Children's Stories of Great Scientists, and it's not necessarily that they are children's stories, but they are biographies of these authors or scientists or discoverers written for the children's audience. And in all likelihood, this was for grade school children, so it's not kindergartners, but perhaps would have been written for children who were in middle school. And one of the things I find so interesting is the level of research she must have had to do in order to write these books. You know, way before the time of Google or perhaps the well-written encyclopedia. And I don't know how she wound up going about researching and writing these, but there are several different volumes that are very interesting. And we're going to start off by reading about Shakespeare. And I don't really know how she determined parts of this story. There's one part where she assumes that he had a happy childhood, which I think, how could anyone possibly know, 300 years ago if someone had a happy childhood? But she makes some assumptions, and that's okay. I feel like this story is somewhat interesting and yet boring all at the same time, so it will help you fall asleep. And I was also contemplating my introduction to Shakespeare, which I think happened around 7th or 8th grade, maybe high school, when we read Romeo and Juliet. I think that was probably, for many of us, our first exposure to Shakespeare. And at that time, the movie by Franco Zeffirelli, I think, had been out for several years already with Olivia Hussey, and I don't recall the name of the actor who plays Romeo. And I think back in the day, we actually went to a movie theater. They did a special viewing for us at the Old Orchard Theater, as I recall. And we watched the movie, which was really beautiful. So we're gonna explore the life of Shakespeare through the eyes of Henrietta C. Wright, written in 1892. And so here's to a beautiful writer who has left us a legacy that continues to be profoundly meaningful all these years later. So you just relax and listen, and we'll explore the world of Shakespeare. So we're in the 16th century. In the year 1564, Stratford-on-Avon in Warwickshire, England, was a quiet little village that differed in no way from hundreds of others scattered over England at that time. In these little villages, the houses were built commonly of wood, with the upper stories overhanging the lower, and with windows of lattice work or horn, as glass was then seldom used except in the houses of the wealthy, where there could also be found carved oaken doors and ornamented balconies, and house fronts covered with plaster or decorated with panels of oak. Sometimes the village consisted of one long straggling street, which began in the open country and ended perhaps in a moor or a bog. But more often the houses were built around a large green, in the center of which were the maypole and common well. There the villagers came in the evening to chat and gossip, and on holidays they made merry with dancing and feasting and the Robin Hood games which were so popular at that time. Each cottage had its garden wherein grew rosemary and fennel and all kinds of herbs, in closest neighborhood to the roses and daffodils and violets, which were the pride of the cottagers. and in the fields beyond the paths led through scarlet poppies and golden primroses to the great forests, which were then found all over England. Quite outside the villages and often far removed from them were the manor houses of the wealthy squires, the castles of the great nobles, and the abbeys and cathedrals whose fine architecture so beautified the country. But in Stratford itself, the beauty consisted mainly in the prettily kept gardens, the beautiful river Avon, which wound round the village on its way to join the Severn, and the graceful yew, elm, and lime trees which shaded the cottage roofs, and in the old church built possibly in the days when the Normans were still trying to make the English nation become French, and which may have served as a refuge more than once for some merry band like Robin Hood's. In one of these cottages, which was richer than many of its neighbors by possessing 2 stories instead of 1, and which had furthermore some dormer windows in its roof and a penthouse over its door, was born in 1564 William Shakespeare, whose name stands far above every other in the story of English literature, and whose genius has made the village of Stratford immortal. Very little is known of Shakespeare's childhood and boyhood, except that they were spent at Stratford. But we know that his father was a man of some importance in the village, and that the boy's early days must have been comfortable and happy. I just have to pause. That's a big assumption, huh? Must have been comfortable and happy. I'm just remembering this was written in 1892. So some big assumptions here, especially when you think of the dark drama that Shakespeare writes about. I don't know about that. Okay, I digress. When he was 7 years old, or when he was 7 years of age, he entered the free grammar school of the village, where pupils were admitted as soon as they knew how to read. Here for 7 years, he learned from books the things that were then taught in the grammar schools, including no doubt some Latin and Greek, and as much English as was considered necessary. For in those days English was thought of little importance, and to be a scholar meant to know certain languages and sciences which the learner would probably never use. Okay, I'm going to do a little insert here about something that I find fascinating. There is a great podcast called The History of English, which I highly recommend. And if we were to time travel back to England in the 1300s, 1400s, and 1500s, we likely would not be able to understand them because of the pronunciation, because of the use of language. So when she writes that in those days English was thought of as little importance, that's accurate. A lot of what was being written was in Latin and Greek and French, and English was just becoming a language that would be in its written form and would be more uniform. But if you are looking for another cool podcast to listen to, I highly recommend the History of English podcast. Okay, so we'll keep going. But outside of school, Shakespeare learned much and stored the knowledge well in his heart. He knew all the flowers, plants, and trees which were to be found for miles around the fields and meadows and woods. He spent hours in poring over the history of Stratford Church, where he had been christened, and to which he went regularly every Sunday, and which joined the England of his day with a past that was full of the glorious and stirring history of the English nation. This old church must have told him many stories of other days, and of the time when England knew no such peace and honor as she knew in Shakespeare's time. Not far away was the city of Coventry, where were given at stated times and with great splendor the religious or miracle plays which Shakespeare must have seen many a time. And a few miles away from Stratford were the great castles of Warwick and Kenilworth, the former of which was rich in memories of the Wars of the Roses, when England was a great battlefield from end to end, and which was second in interest only to Kenilworth, where Queen Elizabeth came from time to time, with her train of lords and ladies, to be entertained by the great Lord Leicester. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And Shakespeare also learned much from the travel which constantly passed through the village, for Stratford was cut into 4 sections by the 2 great public highways which ran through the place from the great neighboring cities, and over which went all the travel of that part of the kingdom. In this way, he heard of the great world beyond Stratford. He learned of those great heroes of the sea, Frobisher, I am going to assume I'm pronouncing that right, Frobisher, and Hawkins, and Gilbert, and Drake, and followed them in imagination in their voyages across the ocean to the unknown continents and islands of the New World. And he heard in the same way of the affairs of London, what the Queen and the great nobles were about, and who was famous and who was not, and what was thought to be fine in the sight of London folk and what they despised as poor and mean. And the boy learned strange things too from the village folk who believed in all the superstitions of the day. He could tell which plants were used by witches to concoct poisonous broths, and what herbs the village apothecary gathered to dispel evil charms, and why he recommended blood of dragons and oil of scorpions and powdered mercury for different diseases. He also heard of the alchemists who could turn iron into gold and clay into silver, and who knew the value and use of every precious stone, and could tell why pearls had mystic virtues and diamonds brought valor to the possessor, and why the topaz could cure madness and the hyacinth protect from lightning. And too, at the county fairs where every kind of ware was sold, the boy Shakespeare could see people buying charms to keep off sickness or bad luck, or to bring happiness and fortune. Here one could buy love philters and crocodile's tears, and amulets graven with text of scripture, and Kabbalistic rings, and could hear strange talk of the wonders produced by the last eclipse of the sun, such as wars and sickness and treason, and could pay an astrologer to calculate his lucky and unlucky days, and purchase a charm which would keep at bay the influence of witches and evil spirits and wicked fairies, and could even buy, were he rich enough, the magical fern seed which would give to the owner the power of walking invisible among his fellow men. Okay, well, all right, well, we'll keep going. I just find that fascinating. Okay, well, let's all go to a county fair back in the 16th century. So, we'll keep going. Among the other things which would be of interest to the youth in Shakespeare's boyhood may be counted the royal progresses when Queen Elizabeth went from palace to palace throughout the country to be entertained by the great lords of the realm. The Queen on these occasions was always attended by an immense retinue, and the journey was usually made on horseback. At such times the villages through which she passed vied with one another to do her honor. Arches of greenery were erected for her to pass under. Flowers and wreaths were scattered before her. The church bells were rung, and the villagers turned out dressed in holiday attire to welcome the queen and to see her brilliant company. The lords and ladies in their beautiful costumes, the horses with their trappings of gold and silver, the trumpeters sounding the approach, the beat of drums, and to crown all, the gracious smile and words of the queen were things never to be forgotten. When Kenilworth was the palace visited, all Stratford was alive with interest, and every villager knew of, and many of them saw, the stately ceremonies of the event, for Queen Elizabeth kept great state always. All the men who served her, chamberlains, cupbearers, carvers, ushers, trumpeters, and grooms, were required to be of fine appearance and manner, and even the smallest service was performed with great ceremony. The bearer of a letter had to deliver it kneeling and kiss it before placing it in the queen's hands. When the meals were served, the attendants were required to kneel once or twice after placing the dishes on the table, and if she dined in public, she was waited upon by the great lords of the realm. And all these things formed subject of talk around Stratford, and all eyes were turned towards Kenilworth when Elizabeth was there. Most interesting of all the events connected with her visit were the masques, shows, and plays which were given at the castle in her honor. One of the royal progresses to Kenilworth occurred when Shakespeare was about 12 years of age, and very likely the boy was present at the entertainments given there, and watched with eager eyes the scene before him. No expense or trouble was spared to make the masques and interludes as perfect as possible, and lords and ladies of high rank were often the performers. Gods and goddesses of the sea, wood nymphs, fairies, mermaids, and witches flitted before the eyes of the audience, and lakes, seas, groves, castles, gardens, and towers appeared and disappeared as if with a magic touch. These plays and interludes were very often acted by children, and there were 4 companies of these young actors who were especially devoted to the Queen's service. These were called the Children of St. Paul's, the Children of Westminster, the Children of the Chapel, and the Children of Windsor, according to the different schools from which they were taken, and they were in charge of the Master of Revels, whose duty it was to provide their costumes, to rehearse them for the plays, and to attend to the stage properties, which included among other things crowns and spangles for angels, seahorses, devil's eyes, castles, and scenes representing the infernal regions. Besides these entertainments in honor of the Queen, Shakespeare saw from time to time the companies of regular players who traveled from London throughout the country, frequently stopping at Stratford, where they gave their performances, as was usual at the time when there were no theaters, in the courtyard of the inn. In this way, the boy Shakespeare became familiar with the best plays and players of the day, and this joined with his visits to Coventry, where the great religious plays were given on the feasts of the church, must have given him many a glimpse of the life beyond his native village. Amid such scenes and impressions, Shakespeare grew to manhood, and it is easy to trace their influence in his work. And thus we know that when he speaks of elves and fairies, of spirits, charms, and witchcraft, or when he describes the character of a rustic or the manners of a courtier, he does so from the intimate knowledge he gained of such things in his boyhood. When Shakespeare was 21, he went to London to try his fortunes in that great city. And a very interesting place was the London of his day, the Palace and Abbey of Westminster, the Tower of London, the River Thames, where one could see the tall masts of ships glistening like so many clustered spears, and the wherries plying in every direction, and the flocks of white swans floating, and at night the lights of silken-covered pleasure boats filled with gaily dressed ladies and gentlemen on their way to some masque or party, enlivening their journey with songs and music. Then there was the famous London Bridge and St. Paul's Cathedral, and palaces and markets and taverns, and beer gardens and long streets full of shops where could be brought cups of gold from Venice and jewelry of all kinds, and carpets and silks and shawls, which may have been taken perhaps as plunder from some Spanish ships homebound from Asia, run down by English sailors. Then, too, there were the daily crowds where could be seen people from all over the world. Knights and courtiers jostling country squires and scholars and divines, touching as they passed the highwayman or thief who had won fame by his clever robberies. Here also were noblemen dressed in velvet and gold from Italy and Spain and France, sea captains and priests, soldiers and servants, all held by chance or interest within the grey walls which circled London, and whose gates gave welcome to as strange a crowd as could be found in the world. Into this curious crowd came Shakespeare, quick to see and eager to learn, and before long all these strange sights were as familiar to him as the faces of his own townsfolk, and each one told its story to him so plainly that as before he had learned the secrets of the fields and the woods, so now he learned men and the interests which made up the great world. And he learned these lessons so well that when he came to write his plays, he made such use of them as no writer ever made before or since. For it is the use of this knowledge of the world, combined with his own genius, that makes Shakespeare the greatest dramatist that has ever lived. But when Shakespeare first entered London, the objects of greatest interest to him were the theatres. For since his boyhood 2 or 3 regular theatres had been opened, though when the first one was built, or rather made out of some dwelling houses, the mayor of London and other officials complained that a place where such large crowds could come together would surely spread the plague, which was then raging in the city. And some people even said that the players were the whole cause of the plague, because the acting of plays was a sinful thing. But when Shakespeare reached London, the theatres had been for some years recognized as respectable and proper places of amusement, and persons of all ranks in life visited them daily. One of the principal theatres was that called Blackfriars, which, like the first one, had been made out of some dwelling houses, and which took its name from the monastery of Blackfriars nearby. And it was this poor little playhouse, lit by candles and with its floor of earth, and its stage covered with rushes, and with an audience that smoked, laughed, talked, and ate as the play went on, that Shakespeare entered soon after he reached London, and by doing so crowned it with a fame as immortal as that which rests upon Stratford itself. The company which acted at this theatre had more than once been seen by Shakespeare in his boyhood, as it was one of the regularly licensed companies, and under the protection of the Earl of Leicester, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. The Earl of Leicestershire. Okay, forgive me. I'm from Skokie. I'm doing my best. I apologize. And it is not unlikely that Shakespeare considered himself very lucky in obtaining a place there, though the place was probably a very humble one at first. The plays that were then most popular were in many cases written by the actors themselves, and as the company at Blackfriars consisted of some of the leading actors of the day, Shakespeare was at once thrown into the society that would best bring out his talents as an actor and playwright. All London then was wild over the plays of Christopher Marlowe, whose genius had first made the English drama seem a picture of real human life. These plays were either full of exciting and splendid scenes from the life of some great Eastern hero who moved around the stage like a prince in the Arabian Nights, or dealt with some trait of human character in such a way that it seemed for the time that the only thing of interest in the world was whether the hero of the play should keep true to his noble nature or yield to some temptation. It was in such pictures of character that Marlowe gained the greatest control over his audience. For the struggle between good and evil is one that is constantly going on in men's souls everywhere. Shakespeare frequented the theaters and acted himself in a small way for a while, perhaps a year or two, and then began to write for the stage himself. At first, he simply joined with some fellow actor in writing a new play or in rewriting an old one. But this only continued for a short time, and soon he had begun the series of wonderful plays which stand alone in all literature. Shakespeare gathered the materials for his plays from many sources, for nearly all the authors of ancient times had been translated into English, and the playwright of the day could choose his plot from many different scenes. In fact, the literature that was open to Shakespeare was rich and varied as a casket of precious stones, and he made good use of his opportunity. He was familiar with the old writers of Greece and Rome, and knew all the old tales of love and adventure and revenge which filled the pages of Italian writers, and was wise in the old chronicles of England, whose history was as romantic and interesting as a fairy tale. And besides this, he read the tales of those adventurers who had traveled in the Far East, and told thrilling tales of Arab and Moor and Turk, or exciting the imagination by relating the dangers of the Southern Ocean or the Arctic Sea. And all this knowledge of books he combined with his knowledge of men, and put both into his plays, and made them so real and true, and when people saw them on the stage, they forgot that what they saw was acting and could fancy that they were looking at real scenes which Shakespeare had in mind when he was writing. And all this knowledge of books he combined with his knowledge of men, and put both into his plays, and made them so real and true that when people saw them on the stage, they forgot that what they saw was acting, and could fancy that they were looking at the real scenes which Shakespeare had in mind when he was writing. And so they laughed over his clowns and fools and jesters, and wept over his unhappy kings and wretched queens and murdered princes whose pitiful stories made them think the more tenderly of their own children safe at home. And when the play was over, they came back to everyday life again. It was to declare that this Shakespeare, who also acted in his plays sometimes, was the greatest writer of dramas that had yet appeared, and they crowded the theater and would listen to no other plays if they might hear his. Among the plays which Shakespeare put upon the stage of Blackfriars, or that of the Globe Theatre, which was built a few years after he came to London, for his plays were only performed at these two theatres, we find one which takes us back to the time when Chaucer wrote the Knight's Tale, and gave us the romantic story of the love of the knights Palamon and Arcite for the beautiful Emily and the sister of, okay, I'm not going to do well with these names. I'm going to skip over them. And the sisters and the queen of the Amazons, whom Theseus, Duke of Athens, had married after the first taking her prisoner in his war with Thebes. And you know what? I think this is a good time to bring this to completion, because this chapter actually is about almost 60 pages long, and there's a lot more to go about Shakespeare. So we'll return to Shakespeare another time. But hopefully this has been boring enough that it has been graceful for you to drift off. And I wish you a good rest. And thank you for allowing the angels and I this opportunity to spend some time with you and to love you. So thank you very much, and we'll talk again soon.